Today's guest is a renowned expert on corporate culture. Now, times have changed and corporate culture has changed right along with it. But let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk and we'll figure out how to better build a high performance culture, even remotely.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guest, David Friedman, is an award-winning CEO, he's an entrepreneur, author, and a renowned public speaker. He has a couple of books out, but it's his most recent book, Culture by Design, which is in its second edition, by the way, a definitive how-to manual for building a high-performance culture that I want to talk about today. So, David, an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Welcome.
Happy to be with you, Rob.
Yeah. And we were actually chatting a moment ago, and I think one thing that we share and that you brought out is that we're process guys, and meaning honestly, I'm going to speak for David here. We're really fun on the weekends, and we're really swell guys. But when we're doing our job, we're trying to get it to be repeatable and predictable. We're trying to get process out of it, and it seems like you kind of follow the same pattern as me, always looking for a process, right?
That's absolutely right, Rob, because I don't think if you don't have a process, it's not likely to be sustainable. And how many things have we all experienced, whether it's in our personal lives or business world, that have become the flavor of the month? The diet and exercise program that, we were really going to do this. This was going to be great. And then, it all fell by the wayside. Or the programs we've all, rolled out at work with the best of intentions until life got busy and they became the flavor of the month. If we don't have some kind of a structured process to make it sustainable, it becomes the flavor of the month. And we can apply that to culture as well as we can apply it to anything.
Yeah, we I think we need to co-write that book, Avoiding the Flavor of the Month Syndrome, by Rob and David. And it's a shame because guys that do training like us, guys that are speakers, we want to entertain and we want to motivate, we want to inspire, but our report card really should be, not only did you learn something, but were you able to implement it? And as you just said, I think a process is the key. And at least for me, I want them to implement. That's how we work with clients, not for a year or 2 years, but you look at relationships with consultants that are 10 years and 15 years old. They'll never last if there isn't a process in place.
I say to people in a similar way, Rob, I say to people all the time when I'm doing a talk that I'll say that if the only thing that happens today is you hear some great ideas and you get excited about them and you go back to work and you mess around with them for a few months and you forget about it, it's a waste of your time. It's a complete, unless what I teach people, unless they can walk away, and if I came back 5 or 10 or 15 years from now and they're not still doing it, then I've wasted everybody's time. This has to be sustainable or there's no point doing it.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I always feel badly when somebody comes up to me and says, I can't wait to listen. If I can get 1 or 2 good ideas, I always think if you walk away with 1 or 2 good ideas, I have failed you horribly. I'll take 1 or 2 good processes maybe, but that's the difference between, the Chris Farley motivational speaker and guys like us, because look, neither one of us would be in front of an audience if we didn't know how to motivate and inspire and entertain. But that's actually the easy part. The hard part is what we're talking about right now. So let's talk about it. Let's dig in. We're talking about corporate culture. Let's start making sure that we all understand what that is. So in your words, what is corporate culture and how can a company do a great job with it?
So let's start with, I'm going to broaden that question a little bit there, Rob, and say, what is culture? Because every organization, every group of human beings that come together has a culture, whether it's a group of friends of yours, or it's a sports team, or it's a classroom, or it's a company. You put human beings together and a culture forms. For me, the culture is the behaviors, and you're going to hear this a lot from me because I'm very behaviorally oriented. The culture for me is the behaviors that become adopted by the group as the norms of how they operate in that group. So you think about a group of friends of yours. And there's a way that you guys, if maybe you got some golfing buddies and you get together and like, which jokes is it okay and which ones we don't do that here, and how much money do we bet for, and how do we, all that stuff is the culture, the environment of the group. And if we look at a company, I come into a company and there's a set of norms, some of them written, some unwritten, some, that I have to figure out, but there's a set of norms about how we do things in this organization. And that influences people. And the reason this is so important is that the culture in any organization has an enormous influence over how people do what they do. So I come into, we'll use a company as an example. I come into a company and I have a certain level of talent, ability, motivation, experience, expertise, et cetera. I'm going to perform differently in one culture versus another. You take people, I sometimes describe it this way to audiences, that if you're a leader and you've got a company, your people exist on a very typical bell curve where you've got on one end 5 or 10% of people who I call these people rock stars. These are the ones that you can put these people anywhere and they're going to stand out no matter where you put them. And on the other end, you got 5 or 10% of your people who are going to suck no matter where you put them. I don't care. Put them in the best place and they're not going to be very good. But 80% of the people are going to go with the flow. You put those people in high performing environments and they will look around and just figure, I guess that's what's expected here, and they'll raise their level of performance. And you put the exact same people, you move those people to a low performing environment and those people will sink to the level of the people around them because the culture, the environment influences how people do things. So when we understand that, and you don't have to have a PhD in organizational behavior to know that. You know that, I know that, we all know that from our experiences. When we understand that, what that suggests to me is that if I'm a leader of a company, if I had a way that I could systematically create the kind of environment that would cause people to perform at a higher level, Jesus, that would seem like the most obvious thing in the world to do. And yet, most don't. They just kind of allow the culture to morph and emerge and become whatever it becomes on its own, instead of taking control over it and putting process and structure behind how they do that. And that's why this is so important.
Absolutely. And I've heard, I've sort of dealt with that 80% pack in terms of just the mood of the team, the mood of individuals. Yep. That 80% has the ability to sway up or sway down. Yeah. I've coached a lot of basketball and you really nail it, particularly when you're drafting. We all got the superstars, they're covering each other.
Right.
We all had, kind of a later round pick and we're developing that, honest. But it's how you develop that middle group of whether you're going to win a championship or not. And
that middle group of players, let's use your basketball example. You take those same players, and if you put them on a team that's a championship team where people expect each other to perform at a high level, they're going to absorb that and they're going to raise their expectations. And if you put those on a lousy team, the same players with the same skill set, you put them on a lousy team where nobody gives a damn, they're not going to give a damn either. They're going to sink to the level of the people around them. So to the extent that you can, as a coach, create a level of expectation on the team that, folks, we're serious about our performance here, everyone's going to raise their level. And the same is true in a company. And so when you understand that, the sort of the output of that, to me, the implication of that is that as leaders, we ought not to leave that to chance. That's something that we got to take control over and purposely create it. That culture is not like pixie dust that we sprinkle over and somehow, look at that, those people magically have a better culture over there. No, it's a process, just like sales and operations and finance and distribution is. It's a process. And most people don't think of it that way, but it is, and it should be.
Right. And so you brought up the term sales. So let's go to sales. Oops, Rob really that's a buzzword with Rob. But I think this does have to be sold sometimes. People hate change. Everything you're saying is logical, but is it instinctive? And so walk me through that. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm with you. But how do you approach an organization where you have a group of people who have experienced that flavor of the month syndrome, who are a little bit cynical about change? How do you appeal to their sense of greed? How do you get them on board?
Yeah, it's actually way easier than you think. And so there's a particular methodology that I teach and that I created and have written books about and have helped hundreds of companies do, that is so ridiculously simple and so ridiculously logical that when people understand it, and I'll explain it to you and your audience, but when people understand it, they don't resist it because it makes so much freaking sense. They're like, why would that not work? Of course that would work. And so I'll give you the brief understanding of this and you'll see its simplicity. So there's a way of organizing the steps that it takes to really embed a high-performing culture in any organization. And it's a framework that I developed that I call the 8-step framework. 8 things. You do these 8 things, this is how you make it happen. But to make this really simple, I'm going to just go tell you about 2 of the steps, because what my experience tells me is that there are 2 of these 8 steps that if you do these 2 things, you're going to be fabulously successful. And if you don't do these 2 things, you're not going to get very far. Those 2 things are, number 1, and this is really simple, but how we go about defining with enough clarity exactly what we want the culture to be. Now, I say this because if I can't define, well, what the heck is the culture I'm trying to create, I'm not going to be able to do it very well. You can't just say, well, we want to have a good one. Like, what is a good one? What does that mean? What is it we're trying to create? And I'm different from most people in how I suggest people do this. So every company out there at some point has written the typical vision, mission, values, and most of it, you've seen it, I've seen it, most of it's a bunch of BS. And it all looks great on the website, but has no basis in reality. I make a really big deal about the distinction between what I call values and what I call behaviors. And the distinction is more than just semantics. So let me explain what this difference is and why it matters. So a value to me is an abstract concept. Values are things like quality, teamwork, loyalty, respect, innovation, service, all these kinds of words. Behaviors, in contrast, are actions. They're things I can see people doing. So let me give you an example of some behaviors. Some of the behaviors I teach in my company are things like honor commitments. That's something you actually do. Practice blameless problem solving. Get clear on expectations. Be a fanatic about response time. Listen generously. These are actions. So a value is an abstract idea, a behavior is an action. The reason this isn't just semantics, but it's really important, is that the typical core values are so abstract most of the time that they mean too many different things to different people, and they're difficult to operationalize. It is extraordinarily difficult to coach people about their values. I can coach them about their behaviors all day long. Behaviors bring a level of clarity about what you expect that the values don't. So I teach people to define their culture in terms of the behaviors that you as a leader say, if I could get all my people doing this stuff, we'd kick some butt in our marketplace. And I give those behaviors a name. It's just my own nomenclature. I call them fundamentals because they're fundamental to success. So you talked about basketball. There's certain fundamentals. You do these fundamentals and on the basketball team, we're going to be more successful. If I can get everybody to do those, we're going to achieve. Every area, there are certain fundamentals. So the first step of these 2 critical steps is what I call creating a set of fundamentals, a clear definition of the culture we're trying to create from a behavioral perspective. Now, the second part of this equation really ties into your thoughts about process. And I call it creating rituals. So a ritual to me is a routine. It's a habit. It's something we do over and over and over again until it becomes second nature. So you start your basketball practice, there's probably certain things you do every time you start the practice. We get up in the morning, we brush our teeth. When we were kids in school, we said the Pledge of Allegiance. They're routines. The reason that rituals are so critical to success is that in what we just talked about, in the absence of something becoming a routine or a ritual, it doesn't last because most people stink at sticking with things. We get busy, things fall by the wayside. When it becomes part of the routine, it's not hard to do, it's just what we do. So the way we can use this concept, as simple as it is the way that I do this in my company and the hundreds of companies I've worked with, is we take these fundamentals I was describing a moment ago, we roll it out in really engaged ways, and then we begin to focus on one of them each week through a series of rituals. So let me give a really simple example. In our company and all of our clients, Every time we have a meeting, doesn't matter what kind of a meeting it is, if there's a meeting going on in our company this week, every one of those meetings, the first agenda item of the meeting is the fundamental of the week. And we spend the first 3 or 4 minutes talking about it. What does it mean? How do we practice it? What can we do better? And a few minutes, and then we move on. But every time there's a meeting, it starts with the fundamental of the week. That gives us a lot of chances to teach. Next week, we do that with fundamental number 2. And the week after that, 3 and 4. And we get to the end, we just keep doing it over and over and over again. It's a ritual. It's just what we do. So the simple idea here is if we can define the culture that we want to have with in a really clear way through a set of behaviors, and then we can create a structured, systematic way to teach those behaviors over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, sooner or later, those behaviors are going to become internalized in people. That's pretty freaking simple. That's the simple idea. There's other things you can do, but that's the core of it. You do that, you're going to be successful. That's not hard.
No, that's extremely well defined. The zeroed in me is leaping for joy because I've heard this topic talked about and it's always so vague.
Yep.
I was thinking while you were talking about rituals, I guess I'm in a sports mood, but folks, if you ever watch a golfer, and I mean a pro, it's not a coincidence, they're a professional. Take a look at the rituals that are involved. And if you see somebody even lining a putt up and going through their ritual and turning and dropping, and somebody goes, "Hey there," or "Baba Booey,"
they go back to the
beginning. Golfer back up and begin that ritual all over again.
Yes.
Because you have gotten in the way of that ritual, and that they almost can't pull loose from that ritual because it comforts them. It's, I've always said, when you have a way of a process, you have a way of measuring what you're doing, but when you can measure it, you can fix it.
Yes.
And so what you're hearing from David is when you have that ritual, not only have a way of implementing, but you have a way of continuing to measure and address. And that certainly helps us sleep better.
Yeah. Well, it's what makes it sustainable.
Right.
It's not dependent upon the discipline or motivation. It's the ritual that makes it sustainable.
Right.
And that's it. One of the things I say to people all the time, Rob, and this will resonate with you, is that I sometimes hear people say, you just got to be more disciplined. And I say, no, you don't. That actually rituals replace the discipline. In fact, my definition of discipline is just my own, is that I say that discipline is the ability to get yourself to do what you know you should do when you don't feel like doing it. You don't want to get up and do that workout in the morning, but I got the race I'm trying to run in 90 days and I got to be ready for it. So the discipline, you're going to be motivated enough somehow to have the discipline to have that self-talk in your brain that gets you to do it. That's not a sustainable thing for 99% of the population. For a little while, that fitting into the dress or running that 5K time is enough motivation for a little while to fight that battle every day and win it. But the emotional and psychic cost of the battle is so high that sooner or later it becomes exhausting and we give up. And that's when everybody falls off their diet or exercise or whatever program. When something becomes a ritual, I, like you, have been working out for 40 some years every morning. It's not even, that doesn't require discipline. It's just how I start my day every day. I can't even imagine starting a day without a workout. That's not hard. When it becomes a ritual, it no longer requires discipline. Discipline is a short-term thing. Very few people are going to stay disciplined. So relying upon discipline as the method to sustain something is a fool's game. Rituals are what make it sustainable.
That's really interesting. And I'm a guy who's actually uses that word discipline a lot, but people always misunderstand. They go, like I'm a drill sergeant. It's no, I try not to deviate from my pattern there, but I clearly have rituals. I was talking to David. I gave a keynote this morning. Been doing them for close to 40 years, and yet one of my rituals, David, is I have a little lightning bolt. It stands for energy and enthusiasm. I pin it on either my jacket or if I got a shirt. And people laugh. They go, "You've been doing this 40 years. You still got to put that bolt on?" It's like, oh, I'll use your word. That's part of my ritual. And what it is it's a healthy reminder because I go to sports, but I always look when I go to a sporting event, I'm a Washington Capitals fan. You bring a family of 4 to see the Capitals play. You could be 1,000 and change before you get it parking or the meal. And I'm reading the paper when they didn't play well. You know what? They just didn't have it today. They, just didn't have it. And I'm thinking,
Right.
could you have not had it? The other game brought
Yeah.
my whole family. I appreciate rituals because then we don't leave that to chance. No, we had it
Yes.
today. The
Yep.
puck didn't go our way. We, a couple things didn't work out, but we showed up and
Yeah.
did what we do. I really don't like the term that's thrown around in sports of just didn't show up today or whatever. Well, and don't charge me for a ticket on the day. Let me
Exactly.
know in advance on the calendar the days you really aren't going to show up,
Yes.
because you and we make a point through our ritual
Yes.
of showing up every day, and we have a measurement to make sure we do it.
Absolutely. That I sometimes there's a fundamental. I've written a lot of fundamentals over time for companies. There's a fundamental very related to this that we have in some of our clients. We call it bring it every day. And it's this whole idea that, you know what, when you show up, it's game time and you bring your best. And it doesn't matter what else is going on, it's game time. And
Yeah.
and it's funny, the story you're telling, because the analogy I often give when I teach that is I say, imagine that you go to a concert and it's like your favorite performer, and that you've never seen them in concert before. You spend a lot of money to get great seats. You get to the arena, you're all excited, this is going to be fantastic. And the performer comes out on stage and says to people, look, I just want to let you guys know, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I mean, my kids were up late and I'm not really I may not be that good today. You okay with that? I don't think so. Or maybe they come in and they say, you know what, I haven't had my coffee yet. So these first 3 or 4 songs, I may not be that good, but I'll kind of get warmed up into it. No, that's not okay. I paid a lot of money for those tickets. I expect you to bring it.
Yeah,
And the
David,
same is
it's
true for
funny.
us.
I don't go to a lot of concerts, but I'm a David Gray fan, if you've ever heard of him. And
I haven't.
he's got kind of a gravelly voice. I saw him at Wolf Trap that 2
Mhm.
years ago with my daughter. He did exactly what you said. First of all, his voice is very kind of gravelly anyway. And he
Yeah.
said, got a little something going on my voice, but I'm gonna do the best I can. And I was
What
quietly
discount am I
offended.
getting?
I was quietly offended as the presenter in me who wanted to say, my man, frequently we show
Yes.
up. I pulled this. This is happening. The cat's sick. Whatever. But we don't tell the audience
No,
that,
you do
and
you
they'll never
deliver.
know, because if we show up with that energy and enthusiasm and put it all out there for them, no one has to know I have an
Yes.
earache today.
Yes.
Because the moment you say that, we're leaning back, going, "Well, not bad considering he didn't get sleep last
Yes.
night or whatever the
Yeah.
story he just told us."
Yeah.
Don't do it, folks. It's not going to
Yeah.
help you. As you
No.
said, another form of fool's gold. Let me move you to
Yeah.
one more piece. I think we may have to do a part B on this someday, because this is really interesting to me. I just want to get to the remote aspect of
Yeah.
this, because yes, we're going to do less remote, but remote is here to stay.
Absolutely.
And so I'm curious, in terms of remote, how companies can kind of manage this culture when they're working remotely. Is
Yeah,
there a
that's a good
shift? Is there
question,
a
Rob.
change? Mhm.
Yeah, so let me say this first to kind of frame that in the old days, let me describe a pattern that companies go through as they grow and tie this to how this affects remote work. So when companies are small, 5, 10, 15 people, they're startups, it would be better if they were really systematic about their culture, but to a degree, they could get away with not being so systematic because the CEO was there. I'm the CEO and everybody sees me. And just by example, they pick up my vibe or the things that they see me do. And that can often be enough to carry the day. But as a company grows and they go from 5 or 10 or 15 to 50 or 100 or 200, or they have multiple locations or they make an acquisition or two, all of a sudden the CEO's presence is no longer enough because people aren't seeing the CEO anymore. And if they haven't created more structure, more formality around how they practice their culture, they become at significant risk of it becoming diluted or losing that. Now, let's apply that to a remote environment, because the exact same dynamic has now happened to everybody, whether you're small, big, or medium. All of a sudden, we can't rely on sheer physical proximity. Hey, we see each other, we hang around. Hey, Rob, good to see you. None of that's happening anymore. We're now all remote, or at least we can still be, as you said, largely remote, many people, that if we can't count on physical proximity to each other as the primary way of conveying culture, well, there better be some systematic method for this, or we're going to be up a creek. And that's why it becomes more critical than it ever used to be to have a methodology, a system for doing that. And so in the system that I was sharing and that I teach and have built this whole platform around, that system is just as effective, but more important in a remote work environment. So let's use the simple example I was giving you of what I do in my own company and all of our clients, of starting every meeting with the fundamental of the week. Well, we do that whether we're on a Zoom call or whether we're physically together. The practice of our culture isn't limited to only when we're together physically. We're on a Zoom call. We start with our fundamental of the week. We talk about our fundamentals every day. We have all kinds of ways through mobile apps and other things to engage in our fundamental. So the point is that the practice of our culture, if we've created a methodology around it, isn't reliant upon physical proximity. So that being remote isn't much of a deterrent to that if we have a system. If we don't have a system, then being remote's a big problem.
Yeah. I was asked a couple of weeks ago, somebody said I was talking about the bolt, or somebody saw the bolt, but all I know is they went, "Hey, you still putting the bolt on even when you do a virtual presentation?" And David, how can you not laugh at that question? Of course, it's like,
I no longer need to be energetic.
Exactly. I've decided I'm not energetic and enthusiastic virtually, but you ought to see me live. Matter of fact, I think the best presenters are the ones that almost forget they're performing virtually. If I could just get a few more laughs, and for the first couple months I was working virtually, by the way, I had a little laugh box, and I would hit a button every time I thought I said something funny. I said, I gotta have it. But unfortunately, it became more distraction. I would miss the button. I hit the button too hard, and it would laugh for like 60 seconds. I had to wait for it to finish. But the point was, I was trying to stay within my ritual, be it virtual or not. And I think what I'm hearing from you, which I'm glad, is we don't have to rewrite the record books because we're working remotely. Much of what we're doing culturally still works. We make little adjustments here or there. Besides, one thing I leave my companies with when I'm done processing the heck out of them is always a little slide with a straight jacket, a circle and a line through it, and say, listen, it's a process. People make decisions, not processes. This is not a straight jacket we're putting you in. We just want to give you a path to follow. But you don't have to hit every number on the path every time. Just make a conscious decision of which ones you choose to bypass based on the circumstances of the time.
And
I would say, we get the mind share.
I would say the same is true as it relates to, in a very analogous way, when we're practicing and rolling out a set of fundamentals. Sometimes, it doesn't happen a lot, but once in a while, I'll have an employee of a company say, well, that feels too constraining to me. It feels like the straitjacket you're referring to. I got to follow all these rules. I say, not at all. So you need to honor your commitments. That's not very restrictive. How you communicate with people is up to you. But you're going to make promises to people, and you damn well better do them. Or you got to get clear on expectations. The language you use, the conversations you have with each other about what clarity looks like, that's up to you. Nobody's putting you in a straitjacket. But you know what? If you're not clear about expectations, a whole lot of problems happen. So we got to do that. So there's a lot of room inside of a broad set of principles. There's plenty of room for individuality in there.
Yeah.
But there's a guiding set of rules about how we do things here.
Exactly. That's what I sometimes call the path.
Yes.
And back to the game of golf, which I play so horribly, but we're working on a repeatable, predictable swing. But we got a downhill lie. We got mud on the ball, whatever it is. We're not completely redoing the swing, but we're adjusting it, maybe based on personality when we're talking to an individual. And I'm just telling you, for me, when I answer the major objection that faces process guys like us, it's people that want to go completely the other way and say, well, now I can't even think on my own. Of course, you can. But I wish you could figure that out on your own, by the way, but I'm going to make it clear for you. And I'm going to draw you a straitjacket with a circle or a line through it and say, nobody's putting you in a straitjacket. We're just giving you a process. Adjust the swing based on those conditions.
Yes.
And I think when we do that, again, David and I, we're not hard to figure out. We're trying to get that culture. We're trying to make this not a training exercise, but a cultural procedure within an organization.
Yes.
And that's the key. All right, I got one last question for you. And by the way, you're going to be setting the record for the longest podcast I've ever had.
All
And
right.
I've got a ton more questions, but I just want to go from a personal side. Uh,
Sure.
we're all on a journey, and so let's sort of leave the book world and just something that maybe this audience and these listeners can connect with. Maybe a lesson that you've discovered in your journey that maybe had the biggest impact on your career or your life. But give me one thing. Let's fit that into that pocket. This pocket-sized pep talk. This is one big pocket, by the way. But
Sure.
this pocket-sized pep talk.
All right. So,
Give me
so
something
here's,
that stands out for you.
I would say, here's one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned that has had enormous impact on me. Many years ago, a mentor of mine had shared with me a simple thought. I was at a workshop, and he talked about the difference between what he called beliefs and what he called universal truths. And the point he made, and I'll show you how this impacts thinking. The point he made is that we often describe things as if this is the way it is, as if it's a truth, when it's nothing more than a belief I have about the world. And there are very few things that are absolutely incontrovertible truths, that 99% of them are just beliefs I have. And that's a simple thought, but when I began to understand that more clearly, I shifted my language, because I'm a big believer that the language we use, even in our own internal dialogue, influences our thinking. And I began to use phrases like a couple of phrases that I use a lot is you'll hear me say, I have a belief that people are this way. Just that phraseology suggests, I don't know that this is how all people are. It's just my belief. And it suggests an openness to the possibility that you may have a different belief, and maybe I could shift my belief based on more knowledge. Or another phrase that I use a lot is I'll say, Rob, in my experience, this is what I've seen. The implication of that is that's just the limited experience I've had. You may have had different experiences that show you something else. And maybe someday I'll have more experiences that'll show me something else. But there's an openness there to, I have a curiosity about, this is what my limited experience in the world has shown me so far. Tell me about your experience, because maybe there's another way to look at this. Just that phraseology creates an openness in my own mind and in the other person in our conversation to have a curiosity about other points of view. If I describe things in contrast as this is how it is, there's no room for any discussion at all, because you already know the truth about things. So just that simple distinction has had an enormous influence for me.
And I really love that. And I think considering the times right now, which we're a bit polarized, I wish all of us, including me, would land on that phrase, I have a belief. For me as a sales guy, sometimes I've never used that, but I have to remind people, because you can ask me, what's good on the menu? What movie do you want to see? And I don't have a sort of passive speed. So I'm like, I'm going to tell you the burger you must have. And then I usually remind people like, but by the way, please understand, it's just the way I communicate. I don't really have to have that burger, but I don't have a passive voice. So I have a belief that the mushroom burger is a good burger.
Yes.
But anyway, I remind people, because I don't want them to think I'm really all in on any of this.
Yes.
I just don't know how to answer the question without my voice beginning to rise. You get the good and the bad, right? All right, very important. How do folks get a hold of you, and give us a little bit on the services you offer and how they would get a hold of you and find you?
Sure. So my company is called CultureWise, the word culture and WISE. And so culturewise.com. My email is david@culturewise.com. My books, Fundamentally Different and Culture by Design, are on Amazon. They're on Audible. They're in all forms. So if you like listening, I do the Audible versions of them. Basically, what we do is that the concept that I was sharing with you and your audience about creating a set of fundamentals and practicing them in a ritualistic way to embed a high-performing culture, I've built an entire methodology around that, and a system and a toolkit and a process to help companies do that. And that process that is called CultureWise, and we've done that with over 400 organizations. So it's really teaching organizations how to apply that basic concept to create a high-performing culture in their organization. So if you check out culturewise.com, that's the best place to learn more.
Perfect. Well, I have to tell you that, play back. This isn't a homework assignment for you, but anybody listening, go play back, my 40, 50 podcasts as we get rolling here. You really won't hear me close this way, which is, this was one of my favorite podcasts, one of my favorite guests. I have to rename it a Bucket Sized Pep Talk, because there was a lot in that bucket, but that works for me. I want to thank you so much, Dave, for being on the show. And everyone, thanks for listening. Stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.